All right, we've seen how Singer criticizes the pro-life argument. And what's contained in his criticism here is really a kind of statement of what his own view is, namely, which we saw earlier. It's wrong to kill persons. Persons are rational and self-aware. We're going to spell out the details and the full implications of that for the abortion question for pregnancy in just a second. Before we get to that, I just want to very quickly run through a couple other considerations that Singer considers. So after he criticizes the pro-life argument in this way, he says, well, he kind of deals with a handful of other things that pro-life people have said. So one thing that some pro-life people have said, I think he cites George W. Bush, President George W. Bush from years back, saying something like this. The genetic code of the embryo is unique. No other being has that genetic code. And Singer cites this fact, and Bush cites this fact as something of a reason then not to abort the embryo, why embryos should be protected, right? That's how Bush was kind of using the fact. Singer is critical of this. Uniqueness is morally irrelevant, it seems. If uniqueness and the uniqueness of the genetic code made it impermissible to kill the fetus or embryo or whatever it might be, well, then it would also make it impermissible to kill any animal or any plant or anything. It would make, I think Singer's example might be, it'd make the abortion of a dog just as morally impermissible as the abortion of a human being. And clearly that's not what the pro-life people think. They think abortion of human beings is impermissible, but I don't know what they think about abortions of dogs. They don't talk about it. But presumably either it's permissible or not as impermissible as the abortion of a human being. So uniqueness is actually a kind of morally irrelevant category, feature, right? That shouldn't be brought into the discussion. He then moves to say something like the following. Some pro-life people move to potentiality. So they say things like, it's wrong to kill potential persons. The fetus is a potential person, is potentially a person. Therefore, it's wrong to kill the fetus. That's another kind of argument that you might hear. And Singer wants to say that doesn't really work either. Because something that is potentially a person doesn't have the rights of a person. Think of it like this. Me, how old am I? I'm 36, I believe. I can run for the office of the President of the United States. I think I can. I think I'm eligible. I am potentially the President of the United States. Maybe not likely, but potentially. It's not impossible. I could be, right? But that doesn't mean I have all the rights and privileges of the President of the United States, right? The President of the United States can, He can command the military. He appoints cabinet posts and can dismiss them. I can't dismiss the Secretary of State. I can't do that. I don't have those rights and privileges, even though I'm potentially the President of the United States. Well, by the same token, right, just because something is potentially a person doesn't mean that it has all the rights of a person. And so the move to potentiality, Singer argues, doesn't work. Okay. Now let's kind of try to, so we've seen him criticizing other arguments. That's basically what most of his chapter is. He's either criticizing these pro-choice responses to pro-life arguments, or he's criticizing the pro-life argument himself. Well, what exactly is his view? To understand it, let's get our timeline back there. There's an embryo up at the beginning, at conception, and there's our bouncy fat baby coming in at birth. What exactly is Singer's view? So I have those other markers up there because those were other views, other pro-choice views, right? Some people wanted to say birth was the important dividing line. Before birth, the thing's not a person, doesn't have rights, it can be killed. After birth, you can't kill it. Singer's critical of that. Viability, quickening, consciousness, and so, right? Those are other lines that people have tried to draw. And so at the very end of this chapter of his book, he considers, well, okay, given what I, Peter Singer, have said, where would I draw the line? And so he starts talking about the kinds of things that he thinks are morally relevant. And the first thing he mentions is that not that quickening is important, but that sometime around the time of quickening actually is important. It's not important because the woman feels the baby move. That doesn't matter. What's important is that right around that time in fetal development, that's when it looks like pleasure or the fetus might be developed enough to have some sort of rudimentary sensation of pleasure or pain. We know this through brain scans. We put little suction cone things, whatever they're called, on people's heads and then poke them, and we see what parts of their brain light up when they feel pain or whatever. And we do the same thing to animals, and that tells us something about how pain operates in the brain. And what it tells us is that you need certain structures, certain parts of the brain need to be developed and interacting in a particular way in order for, it looks like, in order for pain to be experienced. Well, it's not until around 18 weeks that the fetus's brain is developed to the point where it can feel pleasure and pain. That's going to be relevant, according to Singer. He thinks pleasure and pain are morally relevant. Because other things equal, right? Things prefer pleasure and disprefer pain. They don't want pain. They prefer not to have pain. They prefer to have pleasure. Well, okay. That doesn't, just because something can feel pleasure or pain, though, doesn't mean it's impermissible to kill it. It means that if you do kill it, you should kill it as painlessly as possible. That's Singer's claim. Because the fetus still doesn't have a developed enough brain to have significant long-term preferences. It might prefer not to have pain right now, and it might prefer something like that, but it doesn't have a preference for feeling pleasure in the future, for not feeling pain in the future. It doesn't have those kinds of preferences yet. Its brain isn't developed enough yet. And so the capacity for pleasure and pain is important, needs to be taken into account, but it doesn't mean that the abortion after this point is impermissible. What it means is that abortion should be performed as painlessly as possible for the fetus, obviously for the mother as well, but also for the fetus, Singer thinks. And there are certain abortion procedures, I don't think they're particularly widespread anymore, but there were certain abortion procedures where from what we could tell, they seem to be very painful for the fetus. It would kind of writhe around. I think it was the injection of digoxin. I can't remember exactly what it was. Singer has more of the details. Singer's saying, don't do that. Don't do those procedures. If at all possible, avoid inflicting unnecessary pain on the fetus. And if it means taking a few more steps, if it means the procedure is a bit longer, well, that's fine. That's justified by avoiding pain for the fetus. But you can still abort after that point. Well, so where's the line? It's not viability. Where's the line? Where does the thing in question become a person? And to see what Singer thinks, we need to extend the lifeline, if you will, here. And that's already going to tell you something about what Singer's view is. He says, maybe about 1 month. He says, actually it's probably, later than that. But, these are, what we're talking about here is killing persons. And when that's what's at issue, we should try to play it as safe as we can. And so maybe the human doesn't really become a person until 6 months. It doesn't develop, its brain isn't developed enough to be a person until, probably, 3 or 4 months or something like that, 6 months. But they're on, playing it as safe as possible. There's a chance that maybe even as early as a month, the human could have a developed enough brain structure to have some minimal degree of self-awareness and rationality. So playing it as safe as possible, Singer says, let's put it at a month. That's when the baby becomes a person, at a month. That's when rationality and self-awareness kick in. And so that's when, right? So a 2-month-old, the idea would be a 2-month-old is a person. It's rational and self-aware. And so to kill it would be to thwart these long-term deep-seated preferences. Wrong, bad, don't do it. 1 month is the dividing line, Singer is willing to say. Yeah. So prior to 1 month, the brain isn't developed enough in the baby to engage in rationality and self-awareness. Well, what does that mean? Well, look, we got this period now between birth and 1 month. What's Singer think about that? Singer thinks it's morally permissible to kill the baby during that period. That is to say, he thinks infanticide is morally permissible, at least in that window. Infanticide is a word for, that just means the killing of an infant, killing of an infant, right? Homicide is the killing of a human being, Homo sapiens homicide. Suicide is the killing of oneself. Sui means self. Genocide is the killing of a people. Infanticide is the killing of infants. And Singer's view entails that infanticide, at least for some period, is morally permissible. Why? Because the baby, the infant, is not a person yet. It doesn't have rationality and self-awareness. We're going to see this point brought up again. So Robbie George and Patrick Lee are going to talk about this, and so we'll return to this point. But what I want to say, and this will be the last thing and kind of close with, Singer realizes that this might be a bit controversial, that people might kind of balk at this. But what he insists is, well, something like the following. If you think rationality and self-awareness are indeed the markers of personhood, and that it's only once something's a person that it's impermissible to kill it, well, how can you avoid this conclusion? If you think personhood is a matter of rationality and self-awareness, and that prior to personhood it's permissible to kill the thing in question, you have to accept the moral permissibility of infanticide. That's what Singer argues. That's what he thinks. People might be kind of queasy or have qualms about that. Singer recognizes, but look, that's just because Singer's analysis of that is that that queasiness or uneasiness, it's really just stemming from this idea that human life, of the sanctity of human life. And that is a kind of outdated, religiously inflected view of human beings that we need to abandon and jettison. Human life is, there's no sanctity of human life, according to Peter Singer. What's important is not being a human being. What's important is personhood, rationality, and self-awareness. That's all that's morally significant. And so if it turns out that human infants aren't rational and self-aware, well, then it's permissible to kill them. That's Singer's view. And as we proceed, we're going to look at some criticisms that people have raised of this view.